Stacey was suffering from chronic Lyme disease, and her family raised more than $130,000 on GoFundMe for her treatment.
So it was a big outpouring of love and support.
And for Stacey, that support ignited a fire inside her to raise awareness about chronic Lyme disease. She was featured in a 2018 congressionally mandated report on tick-borne illnesses. She's made trips to D.C. in the years after to speak with elected leaders, and was even featured in a documentary about the disease.
And I want to help people. I want to help people who are suffering in silence.
Like Stacey did for so long, until, of course, that sunny September morning in 2015.
It really did, yes, changed my life.
That miracle she hoped for was to walk again. That hasn't happened yet, but she says that moment helped her find her purpose and the answer to the question her 12-year-old self asked when she got sick: why me?
If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have the desire, the need.
I'm Bree Driscoll, and this is a special report here on Spectrum News. Pope Francis has life to the church starting in 1969 when he was ordained to the priesthood. Upon his election to papacy, he chose the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi, the man who gives us this spirit of peace, the poor man. Francis had recently been dealing with double pneumonia, using non-medical ventilators to assist with his breathing. The College of Cardinals will take control of the church until a new pope is elected. Spectrum's Josh Robin has more on his life and legacy.
He was called the People's Pope, known for his humility, his simplicity, and his willingness to break with tradition. His down-to-earth demeanor and sense of humor, like donning a red nose to congratulate newlyweds, was often in contrast with the pomp and circumstance of the papacy. In 2013, he was Bergoglio was born in Buenos Aires in 1936, the son of Italian immigrants. His religious career began in 1958 when he joined the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits.
The Jesuits are a missionary order. They're about going out. They're about opening the door to the church, to approach people where they find them.
After a decade of study, he was ordained a priest in 1969. As a young priest, he found a mentor in Father Pedro Arrupe, a leader in the Jesuit movement towards social justice. Years later, those ideals would shape his work as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. He sold the lavish Archbishop's residence, opting instead for a small downtown apartment. Bishop.
He would go out and he would celebrate Mass in the ghettos and with the poor people around Argentina, around Buenos Aires. And he himself reflected that lifestyle. He lived very simply. He took public transportation. He cooked his own meals.
He carried his reputation for humility into his cardinalship and beyond.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum. Habemus papam.
I announce to you a great joy. We have a pope.
When chosen as the 266th pope, the 76-year-old Bergoglio selected the name Francis in honor of St. Francis of Assisi, who lived a humble life of service to the poor. Pope Francis quickly became known worldwide for his simple lifestyle. He wore a his first Holy Thursday as Pope, washing the feet of young people at a juvenile prison.
He famously said to bishops that they should smell of the sheep. And that's really important. He didn't want bishops who were locked up in fancy residences. What he wanted was people who were, bishops who were among the people that they served.
He was the first Jesuit pope, the first from the Americas, and the first from the Southern Hemisphere, and his new approach to the papacy resonated beyond the Catholic Church, landing him on the covers of both Time magazine and Rolling Stone.
He, in many respects, was more popular with people on the margins of the church or outside the church than he was with people inside the church. His outspokenness on things like climate change, income inequality, popular movements, defending message.
Recientemente han sufrido mucho.
Francis made headlines as he prayed for victims of clerical sexual abuse, urged Catholics to fight the climate crisis, called for greater leadership roles for women in the church, and showed an openness to the LGBTQ community.
If a person is gay and accepts the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge them?
The Pope, however, notably stuck to Catholic doctrine in his opposition to same-sex marriage, abortion, and contraception.
We're going to have some issues in the church. We're going to disagree. But at the end of the day, we have to look at what is the body of teaching. And I think Francis did a really good job of helping us maybe, look at people differently and treat them differently with love, as opposed to trying to judge someone.
Drew large crowds and became the first pope to address Congress.
God bless America.
It was a remarkable tableau. You had Vice President Joe Biden on one side and the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, on the other side. Two good Catholic boys, Democrat and Republican.
Francis's travels also took him to the United Arab Emirates, Japan, and Iraq, where he advocated for human rights and promoted religious tolerance.
He wanted to be known as someone who would go anywhere, talk to anyone if they were interested in dialogue and promoting peace.
More recently, he called for peace in Ukraine, criticized Israel's military actions in Gaza, and condemned President Trump's deportation policies.
Francis is for not open borders at all. He's very
few years, with the pontiff undergoing colon surgery, suffering knee pain, sciatica, and frequent flu and respiratory infections. Even amid his health issues, Francis kept up a demanding schedule, sometimes holding dozens of meetings a day and pushing through pain and fatigue.
He had bronchitis for a week, 10 days, where he couldn't even speak. He had to have someone else read his talks and his sermons. And he insisted on going to outdoor events in the middle of the Roman winter, which is not a good idea. But when you're the Pope, who's going to tell you to slow down? Who's going to tell you to stop?
This endurance perhaps fitting for a man who devoted his life to tirelessly serving others. Josh Robin, Spectrum News.
Our Josh Robin reporting on the incredible life and legacy of Pope Francis. Cardinal Kevin Farrell.
Carissimi fratelli e sorelle.
Dear brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow I must announce the death of our Holy Father, Francis. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father. His whole life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and His Church. He taught us to live the values of the Gospel with fidelity, courage, and universal love, especially in favor of the poorest and most marginalized. With immense gratitude for his example as a true disciple of the Lord Jesus, we commend the soul of Pope Francis to the infinite, merciful love of the triune God.
And we want to continue our team coverage from Vatican City. That's where we find Spectrum.
pontiff who made his last and final appearance yesterday at Easter Sunday Mass passed away at 7:35 a.m. this morning in his home here behind me at the Vatican in Santa Marta, where he lives. The pontiff had been battling double pneumonia. He was in the hospital for some 5 weeks and was released in March. He had made a few appearances over the Easter holidays, and he blessed the crowds who had gathered at St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday, and then rode around the square in his Pope-mobile, blessing babies and greeting those crowds. It came as quite a shock then to hear this news that the Pope, in fact, had died early this morning. His voice was very weak yesterday when he greeted the crowds and when he blessed those crowds who had gathered. The next steps coming up, of course, will be to arrange the papal funeral and then eventually the conclave to elect the next Pope.
Angie, you just received new reaction from the White House?
We're waiting for the reaction to come from the White House, Bree. We did get a little bit of an indication on what President Trump may say later today when he does have a public speaking engagement during the White House Easter egg roll, of course, celebrating Easter the day after the holiday, day after Easter Sunday, certainly. It's a White House tradition. But the White House releasing a very quick message, rest in peace, Pope Francis, putting that out on social media. We were also waiting to see the reaction from Vice President J.D. Vance, who actually met with the Pope just yesterday, as you can see in that photo there. The Vice President writing, "I just learned of the passing of Pope Francis. My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him. In the very early days of COVID, it was quite beautiful." And there you can see their very brief meeting. We know that the Vice President met with the Pope yesterday for several minutes. We know that the Pope offered his family a couple of chocolate Easter eggs for his 3 children who were not there, although the audience was very short. The 88-year-old Pope did offer the Vice President an opportunity to meet with him, have an audience with him. He said that he knew that when he was speaking with the Pope, that he knew that the Pope had not been feeling great, but that he was glad to see that he was in better health. Now, we know that Vance's motorcade entered Vatican City, was only there for a couple of minutes, so we do believe that their meeting was brief, but we know that the two the Vice President's interpretation of Catholic doctrine, using it to justify some of the immigration actions of the Trump administration as the Trump administration takes shape in this second term for President Trump. But specifically, the Vice President, a Catholic, a recently converted Catholic, I guess you could say, or recently baptized into the Catholic Church, deciding that that would be the religion that he would take on in his adulthood. But Bree, certainly not a controversial decision, because, you know, he did have this disagreement in the interpretation of Catholic doctrine with the very top of the Catholic Church, the Pope. But as you can see there, during his last day here on earth, the Pope gracious enough to meet with the Vice President, and the Vice President thanked
forth over certain issues, and then the Pope welcoming J.D. Vance into Vatican City and meeting with him despite this back and forth. And it is it's interesting to see that dynamic and to see them have that personal interaction on the last day of the Pope's life.
And I would say, Bree, that you would, you know, of course, you would imagine that the Pope in his teachings, talking about acceptance, talking about loving one another, loving your neighbor, that he would meet, you know, with Vance. But certainly he didn't have to. Certainly if he was not feeling well yesterday, he could have certainly decided not to. Vance did meet with other official leaders at the Vatican while he was visiting Italy. So the Pope didn't have to meet with him yet. to go to a prison for 30 minutes. So as we're finding out, the Pope may not have been feeling at his best, but still pushed through, taking part in Easter services and took part in a meeting with a foreign leader. We talk about how, the Pope is an important religious leader, but you could also say he's a political leader as well. Certainly his input on certain issues, political issues, was very important.
And a global political leader at that. Thank you very much, Angie. Father Michael Duffy, rector of St. Agnes Cathedral in the Diocese of Rockville Center, joins us now. Father, thank you so much for taking the time on this very sad but important day in the Catholic Church. What is your reaction to the news of Pope Francis's death?
Who would have thought that after the Holy Father greeted the city and the world in the Urbi et Orbi blessing that he gave yesterday in Rome, that we'd wake up to this news. And so I had Mass already this morning. It was the first time I've celebrated Mass in some 13 years without mentioning Pope Francis's name. The parishioners here are quite stunned, are quite saddened. But we also recognize that this occurs the day after Easter. And the Holy Father is a man of faith who believes in the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, as do all Christians. And so we mourn his loss, but we do so with a confident hope in the power of the resurrection of Jesus.
Let me talk to you more about what that is like. Now that the Pope has passed, does that change the Mass at all? And what sort of solace do you give to the faithful at this point in time?
Sure. His name, because he is no longer the Pope. The church is sede vacante, as we say. We are without a Pope. The seat is empty. And so during Mass, we will skip over the Pope's name and mention only the name of the local bishop. But it is quite a striking change, because at every Catholic Mass throughout the world, we always hear the name of Francis, our Pope. And so it leaves a longing. It leaves something in our hearts, because we are a people without a shepherd at this moment. And so the sense of consolation that we have is that we believe in the power of Jesus, and that Pope Francis lived his entire life dedicated to God and to his church, and he lived that life and that service very well. And so I think we can now say, well done, good and faithful servant. You have run the race, you have finished, you have fought well. Thanks be to God for a life well lived.
Executing what he set out to do. Is that the sense that you're getting?
Sure,
almost a little bit of a celebration of his life as well.
There will certainly be time for that. But for any time we lose someone in our own families, and for Catholics, this is a very personal loss for each of us. We call him Holy Father because we believe he is our spiritual father on earth. And so for each of us, it's a very personal loss. I had the opportunity to meet the Holy Father about 5 or 6 different times. And each time he would embrace me, he would greet me. He always had a smile on his face. And so at this moment, we all feel a personal loss, but we do so with that knowledge that heaven is real, and that the Lord desires that we go to heaven for all eternity. And the Holy Father believed that with every fiber of his being, and so do all of us Christians. And so while, yes, we're sad that he's no
A little bit about those experiences you had with Pope Francis. Can you tell me more about those?
Sure. I was always a part of a larger group of about 60 or 75 people, and we'd be presented one by one to the Holy Father by a bishop or a cardinal. And whenever I'd get to the Holy Father, because of my last name, he'd say Irlandese, Ireland, right? From Ireland. I said, no, Holy Father, New York. It was the only time I ever corrected the Holy Father to his face. And he would laugh and smile, and he'd bless me. And I would say, Holy Father, I bring to you the love and the affection of the people of Rockville Center. And he would say to me, thank you, Father Duffy. Please ask them to pray for me. And so how cool was it? I was able to come home from those trips to Rome and get up in the cathedral and say, ladies and gentlemen, I have a personal request for you from the Pope himself. Please pray for me. People of goodwill all around the world doing that for him in this moment.
I think that that was something that was a little bit different about this Pope. Yes, we look at him as the leader of the Catholic Church, it was such an important, huge role, but he also had these very personal experiences with individuals. I have so many people retailing that they had these moments where they had to have they had the opportunity to have a personal interaction with him, and it almost feels that he was more accessible than some other popes. Would you agree with that?
Sure. I don't know if he was more accessible than others, but he certainly appeared that way. I think because in the last 13 years, we've entered into really for the first time a social media highway, right? That everyone has phones and internet and it became ubiquitous to have pictures of the Holy Father on your phone, because if you went to Rome, he was always available. Every pope before him in recent memory has done the same thing. But because of the availability of the iPhone and other phones and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat, this Holy Father seemed to be more visible. And he would engage in that. This Holy Father, more than anyone else, I think, understood the power of image. And so if we think back even to when COVID happened and we were all stuck inside our homes, the Holy Father went out into the square by himself of St. Peter's Basilica, and he blessed the world. And it's one of the most iconic things the Holy Father did. In fact, that's the homily that J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance, was speaking about that moved him so much. And so this Holy Father understood the power of image in a really incredible
to people that they could have personal interactions with as well. So, you could feel like you personally spoke with the Pope over social media. We also have the patron saint of the internet, the sainthood of Carlos Acuña taking place under the Pope. It is so interesting how the Pope has ushered in this new social media.
Certainly, and to raise up this young boy, 15-year-old Carlo Acutis, to beatification first. And now, unfortunately, the Vatican has just announced today, this morning, that his canonization for this Sunday will be canceled. So I'm actually on my way to Rome on Wednesday for that canonization. And now this trip, this pilgrimage of celebration for Easter and for the canonization of this young boy to be a saint is on pause. And now we will be attending I'll be attending the funeral. Instead of going to celebrate this canonization, which will now take place at some other time, we go to pray for our Holy Father on his journey into eternal life.
What is in your head as you are headed to Rome and going to take part in the funeral?
So I think there's a couple of things. First, it's gratitude for the life of our Holy Father, for a life well lived and his many years as a priest and bishop. But it's also hope for the future, right? That we always look forward to what comes next, that we give our Holy Father to the Lord, and in a few weeks we will receive a new Holy Father from the Lord, from the Holy Spirit, that will inspire the cardinals as they gather in the coming weeks to elect his successor. So it's gratitude, it's sadness, but it's also hope for the future and an excitement for what comes next. What that is, nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Father Michael Duffy, rector of the St. Agnes Cathedral in the Diocese of Rockville Center, thank you so much for your time and sharing your experiences with the Pope with us.
You're welcome. God bless you all.
Thank you. And we are watching as the world wakes up to the news of the Pope's passing, reacting to his death, gathering and praying. Our Jenna Enoch has more reaction on the Pontiff's death. Jenna.
Bree, of course, news of the Pope's passing has sparked a wave of reflection, mourning, and tribute from all around the world. We've seen leaders from across political and religious spectrums having offered condolences, including French President Emmanuel Macron, who spoke just a short time ago.
During his whole pontificate, he was by the side of the most vulnerable, the most fragile. With much humility and in this time of war and brutality, a very particular sense of the other and the most fragile. For more for justice. He fought for a certain idea of humanity. That's to say, a fraternal idea.
Online, we are seeing hashtags like #Pope and Rest in Peace trending worldwide as people share their personal stories, quotes, and prayers. Bree?
Jenna, thank you so much. I also want to share that the Pope, the last message that the Pope sent out over social media saying, Christ has risen. The words capture the entire meaning of our existence, for we are not made for our death, but for life. And Jenna, you have more on the legacy of the Pope?
I do, and also what we do now, right? There's such a long process to watching everyone gather. We want you to take a look at what happens next.
It's the oldest enduring electoral system in the world, and many of its traditions have been unchanged for centuries.
The church is a human institution, and it's very much a political process. And so everyone will go in there with their idea of what the church needs now to meet the global moment.
First, the cardinals check into a hotel within the Vatican walls and surrender their technology. The rooms are designed for secrecy, with windows and shades closed and phones cut off, while the cardinals gather for their ancient rituals. Vatican security sweeps the Sistine Chapel for very New Age threats, including listening bugs, and installs electronic jammers, all for secrecy. Then the cardinals step into the chapel under the famous frescoes and begin what's called
boom, the doors are closed and they're sealed inside, conclave, with a key, inside the Sistine Chapel to start voting on who they think should be the next pope.
The cardinals are locked into the chapel because of what happened during the 13th century.
There was a conclave that elected Pope Gregory X, and that conclave lasted for over 2 years.
In 2024, Hollywood pulled back the curtain on the secret conference with the fictional movie Conclave.
They are sequestered, and they must be shielded from all news that may influence their judgment. You understand?
If I'm remembering one scene from the movie, this is war, this is a battle. There are cardinals who will go into this next conclave and any conclave thinking that exact thought.
While we may never know what really happens behind the scenes,
Turns out they covered up for an abusive priest at some point. What if they have a sex scandal in their own background? It's a really uncertain proposition, and nobody really knows how it's going to go.
After taking an oath of secrecy, 3 cardinals are selected to collect the ballots, 3 others count the votes, and 3 more review the results. Printed on the ballots, the words, Eligio in summum pontificum, meaning, I elect as supreme pontiff. Each elector writes the name of one candidate on the lower half of the ballot and folds it in half. Then, in order of seniority, the cardinals take their ballots to the altar. Each places a folded ballot onto a small desk, and then the ballot is dropped into a chalice.
There's no campaigning that happens in public, but there is campaigning that happens in private. People emerge as front runners.
Is held every day until a candidate receives 2/3 of the vote. In 2013, it took 5 ballots to elect Pope Francis.
Pope Francis has personally appointed about 80%, as of right now, about 80% of the voting cardinals that will be in the Sistine Chapel. Now, that doesn't mean that all those people are exactly like him.
The paper ballots are burned after each vote, the smoke from the Sistine Chapel chimney communicating to the waiting world whether there's a new pontiff. The black smoke means no pope has been elected, but when white smoke pours from the chimney, the cardinal's job is done.
And Jenna, you mentioned in your piece the length of the conclave has been a topic of discussion often and a desire for it to be shorter. Can you explain that more to us?
Well, Bree, I think a quick decision can signal a stronger sense of unity among the division or maybe uncertainty. The longer the conclave lasts, though, the more room there is for lobbying or any sort of external speculation. So really the push here is for a shorter conclave. It helps sort of minimize all of that. And of course, the world is watching the election here, as that will be the next step. And this process, if it's prolonged, could create a media frenzy, sort of public anxiety. So a swift decision can certainly help maintain that stability and the trust. And speed, obviously, is the goal here, but the goal, of course, is for the Cardinals to ultimately choose the right person, even if that takes time. Bree?
All right, a lot to take in here. Jenna Enoch, thank you very much. If you are just joining us, Pope Francis has passed away at 88 years old. The Vatican made the announcement at 7:35 local time. Bells tolled in church towers across Rome after the announcement. In Buenos Aires, Argentina. He dedicated his life to the church. That started in 1969 when he was ordained to the priesthood. Upon his election to the papacy, he chose the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi. We will have continuing coverage of Pope Francis's death straight ahead.